Midwest College Football Podcast, a safe for work football podcast. Joined as always by Clinton Boring. My name is Ryan Sadgovia. Clinton, how are you doing this evening?
I'm in a bit of a diabetic coma at the moment. We're still
That's
working on
not.
Leah's birthday cake from Friday, and it's a
Oh boy.
nothing bundt cake,
Oh
and
boy.
it's a like 10-inch diameter one, and there's too much left. So I'm trying to be the brave person in this house and finish it off. I may be dead before Ohio State plays Purdue this weekend. It's getting pretty rough. Not to mention, I put a little teeny scoop of vanilla ice cream in with that giant piece of cake I cut. So if I start sweating profusely or I urinate myself in the middle of the show, it's because I now have diabetes and I can't control my body.
Oh
Other
boy.
than that, I'm good. It was a pretty easy day of work. Um, how are you today, Ryan?
Oh buddy, I'm hurting. I made the mistake of running today, and I've officially broken the running hiatus that I've been on for 7.5 months because Sam signed us up for the turkey trot on Thanksgiving. So I thought I might as well start training so I don't die. And instead, I died today. And now my lateral hip is throbbing. And then on top of that, I had to rake leaves in the front lawn and work on the molding in the house. So I was standing up a lot, and now everything hurts. So we're doing terrific
That's right, because
for
you have
something
Mondays
like that.
off.
Yeah, it's nice. And half a Friday off for 3 more weeks. It's real. It's a certified 3.5 day weekend every weekend. I 10 out of 10 would recommend it if you could ever swing it. Tonight we are going to scoop the playoff committee and drop our top 15 before they get to drop theirs. Take that, playoff committee. Screw
F
you.
'em.
No, we're we're gonna we're gonna drop our personal top 15s tonight. Just rank these teams and then kind of discuss how they would fit into a bracket based on our current rankings. As always, subscribe to that YouTube channel if you are not. If you're listening in the podcast feed, you can find us there at ITPCFB. And conversely, make sure you're following us in the podcast feed as well. Hit that subscribe button. We're at Inside the Pylon on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your shows. While you're there, drop us a rating and a review. We would greatly appreciate it. As always, you can find us on Twitter at ITPCFB, where you can interact with the show, vote in our polls, and all that fun stuff. What is the? Hold on, I should have looked this up before we came on. What the final? We talked about it yesterday. Our Notre Dame, who's better, Notre Dame or Penn State poll. The final
Notre Dame
results.
won in a landslide.
Yeah, like I said, it broke contain. It got to Notre Dame Twitter, I think. 754 votes. Notre Dame took home 86.6% of the vote.
Penn Staters, you missed your chance to retweet it and get in on
That
it.
may or may not be reflected in my rankings tonight. We shall
So I
see.
think it's hilarious because 754 votes? I'm going to bet 700 of them were Notre Dame fans.
At least. Probably.
It's insane.
At
Oh man,
least.
DeAndre Hopkins is rising from the grave now that he's reunited with Patrick Mahomes in a
He's a
Cliff Kingsbury
functional
offense.
he's a functional quarterback to throw him the football.
Yeah,
Will Levis, whoever's playing
that's just,
Tennessee nowadays.
just all the Chiefs need is more weapons to win another Super Bowl. Whatever.
Whatever. Anyway, I have some dramatic music to commemorate this occasion. Maybe. Nope. Playoffs! Rankings!
I like the
What was it?
music.
Was it? It was like a Gus Johnson thing. I don't. It was like a couple years ago. Someone like doinked the field goal off the uprights, and he just started screaming like, "Wow, football, America!" And then they just, I'm like, "What the hell are you going on about, man?" Oh boy. Anyway,
Cocaine.
yeah. There you go. That's probably not an insinuation you want to make on a podcast.
I love Gus. Gus and Joel are two of my favorites, but Fox is not. Fox can go to the get out. They can just get kicked to the curb. I'm tired of that crap.
Clinton's
Especially
favorite.
now that all of Ohio State's final regular season games are going to be big noon. Makes me want to barf. God, so disgusting.
You feel better now?
I do. Let's get to this top 15.
Okay, so how do you want to kind of go about this? I feel like I don't know. Do you want to go like reverse order? Do you want to go to top to bottom? What are your kind of thoughts on this? I
15
don't
to
know what
11,
I
10
don't
to
know what would
6,
be
5 to
okay.
1.
Yeah, I guess that works. I was gonna say, I don't know if that. I think it'd be
It's no
more
surprise
dramatic.
who's going to be 1 and 2. We
Well, I
know
was gonna
who's
say
one.
that's why I think it might be more dramatic going the other way because I think the top four for both of us are gonna be probably relatively similar.
I don't think so.
Are you
I
sure?
don't think so. I do.
Are you sure? You
Uh
positive?
huh. Yeah.
Okay, we can go
I think I'm going to
backwards.
have one in there that you don't. Maybe
I
2.
mean, maybe. You don't know how I ranked mine.
That's true. That's true.
So these are
Bottoms up
not
always.
all right, bottoms up. So these are not intended to be predictive, right? These are just a snapshot in time how we would rank these teams if we were sitting on the committee in that
Yep.
boardroom in Dallas
So
at
you
this
should take
moment in
it
time.
to heart. These are the best rankings you're going to see because the committee
Yes.
will F it up.
Yes, I thought about like I was kind of debating this today. I thought about doing well, I'm going to predict how I think the committee's going to do and I just decided that's not fun. So we can kind of talk about that as we go through. But these are at least my how
So
I would rank these teams, my
we will see
personal
tomorrow
opinion.
night. Missouri somehow will be in the top 15.
Don't say
We
that.
will see
Do not. No.
somehow
No.
Vanderbilt will be in the
No.
top 15. And hell, they might even put
Listen. Hey,
Mississippi
hey, hey,
State in
hey,
there.
hey, 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 hey. There will be no Vanderbilt slander on this podcast. Though I do want it noted, Clinton. We will talk about this eventually. Vanderbilt is the only ranked team Texas has beat this year.
It's impressive. They beat Bama. They beat Auburn.
Well, it's not impressive to beat Auburn. I think there's probably a couple high school teams that might be able to beat
I
Auburn.
think
But
Penn
anyway,
State could beat Auburn. You asked me the other night. I think they could beat Auburn.
yeah, well, Auburn's not a top 10 team, buddy.
Uh,
I think Bowling Green could beat Auburn.
Just feed Harold Fannin.
He's getting Heisman love, man. I've seen him on some Heisman top tens,
He
kind of at the
should.
back end. But
He's going to look great in Bengals orange next year.
trade one orange to another. Why don't you start us off here? Why don't you give me your first five here?
Well, I accidentally screwed up to let the people know, so I actually ended up with 16, and I'll just
I
throw
did
out my
16 too. I
16th
did
one.
16 as well.
Okay, that's fair. So we'll go 16 to 11. I originally forgot. Well, I secondarily originally forgot. I don't even know if that's possible. BYU. So I had to go back and do it again and make
That's
sure I
so
put them in there.
embarrassing. That's so
So
embarrassing for you.
I feel horrible to the undefeated team, but I didn't want to be our buddy from over the summer that you bashed on for Notre Dame. I didn't want to be that guy that BYU, the Mormons, hated on this podcast. So, anyways, number 16, my first team out, I guess, of our top 15 was the LSU Tigers.
Hmm.
Number 15, the Texas A&M Aggies.
Mm-hmm.
Number 14, the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Ooh.
Number 13, the Iowa State Cyclones.
Oh wow.
Number 12, the SMU Mustangs.
Mm-hmm.
And number 11, the Tennessee Volunteers.
Well, that's interesting.
I told you.
I thought I was kind of low on Tennessee, but I don't hate that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hate that at all. So I went 16 as well, just because I wanted to put another one-loss team in here. So 16, I have Pitt instead of Iowa
Oh, wow.
State. I kind of went back and forth on those. Iowa State would be 17 for me, but Iowa State they literally have not beaten anyone. Texas Tech did everyone a favor by beating them, so we don't have to actually pretend like these guys are good. They're not. They have a good offense, but they're
Well, I
not
can still win the Big 12,
that
though.
good. They could, but I don't think that they should be in as an at-large team. So Iowa State would be in this instance 17 for me, but I got Pitt at 16. I have LSU at 15, Texas A&M at 14. I have Boise State at 13, Alabama at 12, and SMU at 11.
Okay. So where do we differ most? I mean, obviously our LSU Texas A&M, I assume, is different because A&M has the head-to-head.
What?
Both two lost
No,
teams.
we have what?
You have
I
LSU
just
behind
have them.
A&M.
You have them. Yes, I thought you had
Yeah,
LSU behind A&M as well.
I do.
Yeah.
I was saying we both have that because A&M has the
Yes, because of
head-to-head
the
over
head because of the
LSU.
head-to-head. Yes.
Yes.
Both. So I wrote down. I went and wrote down each the ranked wins that each team has.
Hmm.
Obviously, A&M with the head-to-head, and then LSU has beaten Ole Miss, who is still a ranked team.
Hmm.
Um, Boise does not
Hence
have
why
any
Ole
ranked
Miss
wins.
is not in my first 15.
Yes, because they have not beat anyone ranked, I believe. Pitt has no ranked wins. Boise has no ranked wins. Bama has Georgia, and I think South Carolina would be technically 27th, so they're kind of knocking on the door there. And then SMU has beaten Louisville and Pitt.
And their one
Uh,
loss came to
is
undefeated
to
BYU, who we
BYU.
all
Yeah.
thought was a horrific loss the
Yes.
first
Well, you
week.
think. Well, so think like to the first 3 weeks. So they go like they need a last minute touchdown to beat Nevada, who everyone
Uh-huh.
expected was going to be one of the worst teams in FBS this year. And they beat
Hmm.
the doors off of some Division II team, and then they lost to BYU, which everyone again thought was a bad loss because everyone thought BYU would be bad. And all of this came before the quarterback change. So this was all Preston Stone. Kevin Jennings has
Hmm.
come in and has been really good for them. And I mean, SMU controls their own destiny
Hmm.
in terms of getting to the ACC title game. And I think, I mean, if they win out, if they go 11-1, we might end up in a situation where that Miami SMU game, both teams are getting into the playoff regardless of what
Hmm. And
happens.
then Clemson's staying home.
Yes. Well, yeah, I don't think Clemson is irrelevant in this conversation now because they've not beat Clemson. Speaking of no rank wins, Clemson hasn't beaten a team with a pulse this year. The only two teams they've beaten with a pulse have beat the shit out of them. So Clemson is not relevant in this. They need help. They're not getting it as an at-large team. We're not having a Clemson conversation.
Yeah.
So or the top half of these back, I don't know how I phrase that. So remember, as we're kind of going through these rankings, your top 5 ranked conference champions get automatic berths, which means that you are not necessarily guaranteed a spot in the playoff by being in the top 12. More often
Hmm.
than not, if you are the 12th ranked team, you're going to find yourself as the first spot on the outside looking in because of that group of 5 champion. And now we could end up in a situation this year, Clinton, where depending on where Boise State falls in these initial rankings and what ends up happening in the Big 12, where Boise State could end up getting a first round bye, depending on what
Hmm.
happens in the Big 12 down the stretch here. Another thing to remember is depending again on what happens in the ACC and the Big 12, we could end up in a situation where even being 11th does not get you a spot in the playoff field, which I think there's an interesting scenario that we'll talk about here in a second. Because again, like if we're talking like Big 12 hypothetically this year, if it ends up being BYU at 12-0 playing, 11-1, 10-2 Iowa State, Iowa State wins that, they're going to come from outside of the top 12 to get that
Hmm.
auto bid spot. And I do not believe that if it was a 12-0 BYU team who loses the conference championship game, then fall out of the rankings entirely. So
Yeah.
you lose another spot there. So you basically have to be a top 10 team to guarantee yourself a spot. You have to be a top 9 team to guarantee yourself a spot in the playoff because there's going to be no bid stealing from the Big Ten and SEC. Those two championship game participants are more likely than not going to both be top 5 teams. But
Well.
depending on how things shake out in the ACC, the Big 12, it is very possible that there are 3 ranked outside of the top 12 who end up in the playoff field. It may not happen this year. I don't think it'll necessarily happen this year, but in the future. So to be guaranteed an at-large spot, you have to be in the top 9, more often than not
Well.
the top 10. So that's just
Yep.
something to kind of keep in mind here as well as we kind of go through these.
So, one quick thing on mine, if we noticed, I kind of went the 2 lost teams and I started with the 1 lost teams. That does not continue the perfect theme throughout as we get into my top 10,
Same, same,
but
same, same.
I kept the 2 lost teams at the back end, the Iowa States up there. I thought about Pitt. They looked inept last week against SMU, and they kind of looked
Mhm.
inept offensively against Syracuse. If Kyle
Yeah.
McCord doesn't gift them 5 interceptions and however many pick sixes, I don't know if they beat
Yeah.
Syracuse.
No, I agree. And that's why I have them and Iowa State just kind of behind those 2 lost SEC teams because I think they deserve to be in conversation. But I don't think like I'm going to say something later that's going to make this entirely hypocritical because I kind of agree with your point where we're ranking these teams in baskets by 2 lost teams, 1 lost teams, undefeated teams, and it's not a perfect kind of. I didn't apply that same criteria all the way through, but I tried my best to kind of rank these teams in different baskets, and you get bonus points for being an undefeated team or a 1 lost team versus a 2 lost team. But I just don't think either of those teams are particularly good, so I don't really want to devote a lot of airtime to them.
Mhm.
What do you have back half of the top 10?
So 10-6. Number 10, the Boise State Broncos.
Nice.
Number 9, BYU.
Okay.
Number 8, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Number 7, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And number 6, the Texas Longhorns.
Interesting. So this is kind of where my one loss thing comes in because I think so. I'm going to kind of spoil the lead here. I have BYU and Indiana ahead of all of the one loss teams except for Georgia and Ohio State.
Oh, wow.
I don't, and I don't necessarily think that it's like, so how we'll get to it when we get to the end. So 10, I have Penn State, 9, I have Texas, 8, I have Tennessee, 7, I have Notre Dame, and then 6, I have Indiana.
Okay.
So in terms of the pantheon of one loss teams, like I don't think this is how they're going to end up. But if we're just looking at this year and not factoring, like I feel like Texas is getting a lot of, like, is getting bolstered by their preseason expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're getting ranked highly, and I think Penn State falls in the same thing here. Like if you just like blind resumed all of these 5 teams and you looked at like Texas and Penn State and what they've actually done this year, it's not a lot, man. Like I said, Vandy is the only ranked team that Texas has a win against. They got their doors blown off by Georgia. Penn State's done even less. They have no ranked wins. Depending on what happens with Minnesota over the next couple weeks, they could go 11-1 with no ranked wins. And then same thing with
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee. They're going to get bolstered by the Bama win a little bit, but they've looked awful otherwise. They have a bad loss to Arkansas. And with Notre Dame has as many ranked wins as Tennessee, Texas, and Penn State do combined.
But
Ridiculous.
maybe the
It's
worst
ridiculous.
loss out of all of them.
Definitely. Oh, it's unquestionably the worst loss. And I think I'm fascinated to see how the committee ranks these teams because it'll give us some data on where they think things should be in terms of good wins versus bad losses. Because if you're going to put more weight on the bad losses, then Notre Dame should be behind all of these teams. But that's not what I'm doing because that's not what they've shown in the past. And then with Indiana, again, you get you get the bump because you haven't lost. I don't care that you have no ranked wins. You've beaten the crap out of everyone. So, for reference, I was looking at some ESPN numbers today. So, Indiana is 7th in ESPN strength of record. Their strength of schedule is 103rd.
Mm-hmm.
Their strength or their game control ranking, however, is 4th in the country. So the game control is the chance that an average top 25 team would control games from start to end the way this team has. So based on like again, the way that Indiana is beating teams is one of the most impressive resumes in the country,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of who they're playing. So the point I wanted to make about kind of like these baskets of teams, right? You get the bonus points for being undefeated. Like if you were going to sit here and say, who do I think would win right now on a neutral field, Indiana or Tennessee? I don't know. Maybe that's not a good example because I think Indiana would give them a game. But I'm not comparing Indiana to Notre Dame, Tennessee, Texas, Penn State, SMU, these one-loss teams because Indiana hasn't lost yet. Like you're above that. Like you get those bonus points for not having to lose. Now, if they
Mm-hmm.
lose to Ohio State and you're bringing that resume down a rung into that pantheon of one-loss teams, then I think Indiana's in trouble because you don't then have a resume to stand on. Even though you're beating the crap out of everyone, if you're comparing 11-1, well, maybe 11-1 Tennessee's not a great example because then they would have beaten Georgia. But let's say if you're comparing, 11-1 Notre Dame to 11-1 Indiana, then and Notre Dame's beaten Texas A&M and Louisville, and Indiana's beaten no one. Okay, I don't care that Indiana's beaten everyone then. Like you need to have that resume point to stand on in terms
Mm-hmm.
of these rankings. And I think where Indiana ends up in this initial ranking is going to be very telling on what the committee feels about their resume because I think like if Indiana's above of all the one loss teams except Ohio State and Georgia, I think they're in pretty good shape. But if they're behind like Tennessee, Texas, Notre Dame, Penn State, I think they might be in trouble in terms of making the playoff, Clinton, because what the committee's then saying is you haven't lost a game yet, but we don't respect your body of work. And you still control your destiny because you could beat Ohio State and get into the playoff. But if you lose to Ohio State, we already think that you're not better than these teams, and you just kind of proved that there. So I'm fascinated to kind of see what happens with the Hoosiers tomorrow night. And I think their initial ranking is going to be very telling in this.
Yeah, I think it's going to rely a ton on where they are tomorrow. Just like you said, if they are below some of these already one-loss teams and you don't beat Ohio State, not only do you, if you don't beat them, if somehow you get boat raced by Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
I think, which I think could be on the table, I think you're in big trouble. That's not my opinion. I think Indiana should be in at 11-1. The problem
Mm-hmm.
is, I don't know if the committee's going to put you in. We've
Well, then it
watched a
could.
lot of their games, way more than what the committee probably has. We've seen how good they are. I think they could go toe to toe with a lot of these teams. They may not beat them, but I think they would be
Oh, sure.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think they could keep it close. They have a ton of veteran presence on the team. They have a really good quarterback. They have a great coach, play good defense. Their offense is explosive as can be. And that's where we were talking about today with some people online. And what else can Indiana do, right? You can't, the players don't pick their schedule.
Nope.
They have to play what's in front of them. And what's in front of them, they have absolutely destroyed week after week after week after week. And we even talked about yesterday, they gave Michigan State a 10-0 lead, and they still slobber knocked them for the rest of the game. It didn't matter. So it has to carry something, right? If you were to put the block M or the block O next to Indiana's
Oh,
resume right now,
100%.
they'd be a top 3 team. There's
Yep.
brand bias. We all know
Mhm.
it. And if you don't want to admit it, that's fine, but there is. If it was Georgia or Alabama's logo, we'd all be pining. Oh, it's Georgia. Look what they're doing to everybody. It doesn't
Clinton,
matter who they
it was
played, right?
literally Michigan last year. They
Yep.
didn't play us. They didn't play a soul for 9 weeks.
It was the exact same up until this point. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with the Indiana. I think it's very key. I think also another team too. I mean, even BYU, it's important for them to
Sure.
be where they are.
Yep.
Boise State, you already said it's important where they are. Now, Boise State gets the benefit of the doubt that they'll be the group of 5, but BYU is tough. I think Penn State is tough.
Mhm.
Just said Penn State has no ranked wins. They may not get one. And if for some reason you're in a dogfight with somebody, a 10-2 SEC who has ranked wins versus an 11-1 Penn State who doesn't, I think Penn State's probably in, but you can't be guaranteed. You're not feeling comfortable. If Penn
No,
State
and
loses another game, I don't
oh,
know
they're
if they're
done.
in the
They're done.
playoff at 10-2.
They're done. I think they're cooked.
Besides chaos, right? If a
Mhm.
bunch of other teams start losing, there's just nothing to fall back on. Okay, we lost to Ohio State. Okay, that's cool. Who'd you beat? Oh, you also lost to Purdue? Uh-oh.
Oh,
We're not putting you on here.
Buddy. If you lost to Purdue, that's worse than losing to Northern
I
Illinois.
would see the only feasible game they'd lose is Minnesota. I guess maybe Maryland if Maryland for some reason decide to be plucky for a day. I think again, looking in this mid-tier teams, if Notre Dame loses again, they're out.
Oh, they're done. Yeah, they're done. You can't lose.
Texas is still in there because the SEC is wide open, and even I think if Texas loses again, they have a chance to get to the SEC title game.
Maybe.
So it's kind of interesting. We talked a lot about how 2-loss teams could be. Oh, this team would be easily in. I think the only teams that are purely secure with probably 2 losses. Oregon's not going to have 2 losses, but like the big brands, right? Those are the ones like the Ohio State, the Georgia. You could argue Bama, maybe if Saban was there, I don't know, but you're not feeling very safe if you get the second loss.
I think if Bama wins out to finish 10-2, I think they might sneak their way in. But
I think they're in.
They probably need a little bit of help.
They got a massive game against LSU this week.
Another thing,
whichever team loses that is done because they have 3 losses.
Game. That is
This is a potential eliminator game for Ole Miss too. Ole Miss has 2 losses. They lose, they're done.
Yeah, there might be a year where we get a 9-3 team, but I said it all summer. I don't think a 9-3 team is getting in. And the way that this is kind of played out with these unbalanced conference schedules, I think that's going to ring even more true.
And look how long it took just to get a 2-loss team into the last playoff.
Mm-hmm.
How I don't think they're going to want to start their first year off with a 9-3 team.
Oh no. One more thing on Indiana. Again, I think if they do lose to Ohio State, even if it is kind of a closer game, I think they could end up being that team that, okay, they're ranked 11th heading into the conference championship weekend. They're looking good, and then you get bumped out because Iowa State upsets BYU or something like that.
Yes, the one that you're on the cusp, and then you get the bid stealer, and then you're left.
You would have been a playoff team, but the bid stealer knocked you out. But no, I feel like we've seen a couple of times the last few years that, like the AP poll as it goes through the season, it always feels like the preseason bias on some of these teams rings true. Like Penn State's a perfect example. Like you have a close loss to Ohio State. It's not enough to knock you down a ton, but you really haven't done anything else to distinguish yourself this year. So you're just kind of there because it's like, well, who else are we going to put there? And I think we've seen a couple of times where the committee's first ranking looks drastically different than what the current AP poll looks like. And it's like, whoa, why
Mm-hmm.
are these teams ranked like this? And then they explain it. It's like, oh, yes, because they haven't beaten anyone worth a damn this year. And then the
Mm-hmm.
AP poll kind of course corrects after that. So I'm really interested to see the order that these one loss teams are ranked in relation, especially to BYU and Indiana in that like 5 to
Maybe Ohio
11 and
State's
12.
not even top 5 tomorrow. I'm just kidding.
I mean, no, they at least have a top 10 win. They have a top 10
Yes.
win.
Yep.
Last 5 year Clinton.
Number 5, the team that's playing with fire. They are tender, swiping for some L's. It is the Miami Hurricane. Number 4, the Indiana Hoosiers. Number 3, Georgia Bulldogs. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 1, Oregon.
Homer.
Well, top 5 win now. Georgia doesn't have that, do they? Was
They've beaten
Texas top?
Texas
Texas
and
is top
Clemson.
5.
They've beaten Texas and Clemson.
I'm not buying the BS with Clemson. They're horrible.
As opposed to what? Penn State and Iowa.
What's our old Iowa? Best 3-loss team in the country.
I don't know that I'd go that far. I think Louisville might have something to say about that. Number 5, I have BYU. I gave them the slight edge over Indiana because they have 2 ranked wins against Kansas State and SMU. That SMU win is looking better and better each week. One of the more impressive wins in the country. Again, I get it was against Preston Stone, but still, you get credit for that. Miami at number 4. I probably could have gone either way with them on BYU here. I agree with you. I think they're playing with fire, and it would not surprise me if they lost at some point because their defense stinks. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it is not a good defense, but you can kind of get away with that when you have arguably the best offense in the country. Number 3, I have Ohio State. Number 2, I have Georgia. Again, this is my hypocrisy where I have the one loss teams ahead of the undefeated teams, but I think the eye test has to come in at a certain point, and I mean, looking
Mm-hmm.
at these two teams, I think they're 2 of the best 3 teams in the country. I mean, Georgia did not look particularly great against Florida last week,
With a
at
third string
some
quarterback.
at some point, Carson Beck is going to cost them a game because he cannot stop committing turnovers. But Ohio State, say what you want about Penn State, that's still one of the probably 5 best wins in the country this year. Georgia has throttled Texas and Clemson, so they get the boost from that. But number 1 is Oregon because they've beaten Ohio State, they've beaten Boise. That's 2 top 15 wins, and they haven't lost a game. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with that one.
Mm-hmm.
So as we, I think something that, so like I don't understand how like ESPN strength of schedule works because I kind of pulled this up too just to kind of see where some of these are. Um, Georgia's strength of schedule is number 1 in the country. Or maybe it was strength. No, it was strength of record. No, their strength of schedule is number 1 too. Okay, I can't read my own handwriting. Oregon's 54, Miami is 40 or 45. Sorry, Oregon's 45, Miami's 46, BYU 61, Ohio State 19, Penn State 28, Indiana 103rd. Already mentioned that one. Tennessee 33rd, Texas 54, Bama is 11th, LSU is 16th, Texas A&M is 17th. SMU is 71st and Notre Dame is 75th. So those are just some kind of numbers to contextualize here as well. I kind of sort of looked at ESPN's FPI, which is a team's true strength on net point scale, expected point margin versus average opponent on a neutral field. And then I saw that they had Ole Miss at 6th and USC at 17th, and I'm like, we're not using this as a metric because that's absolutely ridiculous.
Wait, USC is still the 5th best team in the Big Ten, Ryan. Didn't you hear Joel Klatt?
5th best team in what? I was going to say 5th best team in losing 5 games, but I think they're the best 5-loss Big Ten team in the country, maybe? I don't know. So not a lot of disagreement there between us, Clinton. I think our biggest variance was you had BYU a little bit lower than I did.
I had Tennessee out of the top 10.
I don't hate that. Like I struggled with kind of where to put them in relation to Texas and Penn State and Notre Dame and
Is
SMU.
there?
And I if you wanted, I don't buy Tennessee as being like the best. That's not the best one loss team, but after, so I don't even. It's just I almost don't even consider Georgia and Ohio State one loss teams just because it's just like you lost to a good team and whatever it happens. But like
Mhm.
that tier below, I don't. I because I think what's Tennessee sixth in the AP poll. That should not be a thing because again, I get they beat Bama, but they've looked so mediocre otherwise. Like I think Kentucky was down like eight, was out had like eight starters who didn't play last week, and they still almost beat them.
Mhm.
You lost to an Arkansas team who's not all that great. You barely beat an Oklahoma team that can't move the football. I mean, I get you were never in danger of losing that game, but I don't see it with Tennessee. I think Penn State might beat Tennessee, and I don't think Penn State would beat anyone else in the top 10 right now. So I don't know, man. I'm interested to kind of see where the committee has these one
Well, the
loss
question
teams
would
in
be for
relation to
Penn
each
State
other.
is you're gonna have to score probably 30 points to beat Tennessee. 20, 25,
No, you're not. Tennessee
28.
can't score. They're only scoring
And you're
20, or they scored 28 on Kentucky.
okay. Well, I think you're gonna have to score 25 to 28 as Penn State to beat Tennessee.
But just drag them into a rock fight again, man. Just drag them into a rock fight.
I think I would like to give Penn State the benefit of the doubt there, but maybe depends on where you play the game. If they got to go to Tennessee
Also true.
versus
Also true.
hosting it at home.
Yep. So for my playoff bracket here, what this would look like is Oregon would be the number one seed as your Big Ten champion. Georgia number two is the SEC champion. Miami would be third as the ACC champion, and BYU would be fourth as the Big 12 champion. So my matchups in the first round would be Ohio State, even though I have them at number three, they would fall down to number five as the first non conference champion. They would play, in this instance, Boise as the 12 seed. Again, Boise just outside of my top 12, but in this, as the presumptive group of five highest ranked champion, they would get that fifth auto bid slot. Number six, Indiana would be playing number 11, SMU. Number seven, Notre Dame playing number 10, Penn State. And number eight, Tennessee playing number nine, Texas. And I would like to say that this is not going to play itself out like this because Tennessee still has to play Georgia. Texas still has to play Texas A&M. Alabama and LSU play, and maybe the winner of that game comes up into some rankings. Indiana and Ohio State are still playing. If SMU is number 11 heading into conference championship game weekend and they get their doors blown off by Miami, do they stay in? Do they get moved out? I don't know what's going to happen with the conference championship games either, like how the loser of that game is going to be impacted in the rankings. I can't imagine it's going to be a lot,
Mm-hmm.
if at all. That's
I guess it
another
depends on the
fascinating
result.
subplot.
If you get blown out, then I think there's a discussion. If it's a good close game and you're not on the fence, then I think you're safe.
I think the only issue with that is so like I think the only thing that it could possibly apply to this year is the ACC, depending on what happens with SMU. I mean, I guess the
Mm-hmm.
Big 12 too depend like if BYU loses a game and they're down to like 10th heading into the conference championship game. Because then if you're saying, well, you lose your conference championship game and we're going to move you out of the playoff, that just kind of like takes away the incentive of playing in a conference championship game. It's like, well, I know I'm playing for a first round bye, but why would I want to play this game
I'm going to get
if I
left
lose it,
out
it's
for a
going to
team
knock
that
me
didn't
out.
play.
Because that was like when they were talking about like if Penn State beat Ohio State and you had Penn State, Indiana, and Oregon all finish 12-0, like would it be more advantageous to be the team that loses the tiebreaker because then you're probably going to be the number five seed in the playoff and not have to worry about playing the Big Ten title game?
And most likely draw the group of five team.
Like I think like knocking a team out of the playoff because they lost their conference championship game is going to be the quickest way to get conference championship games taken away.
Be the quickest way to 14 in 2 years.
Well, that's true.
They've already
Clinton,
cushioned that blow.
what's your playoff bracket looking like here?
No, I'm not going to lie. I didn't draw it up, but one would be Oregon, two would be Georgia, three would be Miami, and at this point, four would be BYU. So that would be my 1 through 4. Number 5 would be Ohio State. If I'm going exactly off my rankings, would be playing against SMU right now, number 12. And then my next team being 6 would be, well, since Indiana's at 4, I guess I would have Indiana at 6, playing against number 11, Tennessee. And Texas would be 7 then. It's hard looking at all these numbers now because it's my rankings versus those. Texas would be the next. 7 plays the 10, so the 10's Boise. And then Penn State, Notre Dame would be the 8 and the 9.
That would be fun.
That would be a really fun game.
I'd enjoy that first round.
I'm proud of myself for not screwing that up. I got it all right.
He did it on the spot.
But I agree. I think LSU Bama winner, as long as they win that game and win out, I think they're in. Because Bama would have wins over Georgia and wins over LSU, even though that would be in Death Valley. That's still a very impressive win. Although LSU's loss to USC is not looking very good at this point.
Well, and then depending on what happens with South Carolina, too, that could end up being another ranked win down the stretch.
Yep, and then you got one, a toss-up. Don't forget Texas A&M got to play.
That could very much be another playoff elimination game. Again, depending on what the committee thinks of Texas.
Yep.
Because I don't think before that game, I don't think Texas plays anyone.
Well, you get Florida this weekend.
Yeah, Florida's third string quarterback.
Yeah, they should handle Florida pretty easily, and it's at home, I believe. A&M to end. I think they get like some FCS opponent in there. Yeah, they have 3 or 4 games left.
Yes, hold on. Their 2020. Speaking of Texas, it was announced yesterday that Notre Dame and Texas will be playing a home and home in 2028 and 2029. Fun fact. So Texas is off. They were just off. They got Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. So,
so they're already done with their FCS game.
Depending on what you think of Florida and Kentucky, those are kind of like FCS teams.
I don't think they're getting clipped by any of those other than maybe Texas A&M. So a lot at the end of the season. What does A&M have left?
A&M has a bye this week, and then they do. A&M has an FCS, or they play New Mexico State. New Mexico State at Auburn, and then Texas.
So they're not losing either.
So A&M should be 9-2 going into that game, and depending
Texas
on
should
where,
be 10-1.
Yep. So depending on where these teams fall in the rankings heading into that weekend, it very well could be a playoff elimination game. Because again, with Texas, it'll be interesting to see their initial placement because, again, they have one ranked win. It is Vanderbilt, and they don't really have a chance to bolster that resume until they play Texas A&M.
I think with A&M too, they have 2 losses, but they only have 1 in the SEC. So they are also still gunning for a bid in the SEC championship.
Yeah, I believe if they win out, they will be in.
Against most likely Georgia. Barring Tennessee beating Georgia.
Yes.
So I kind of want to see something different. I don't know if I want to rewatch that Texas-Georgia game again. I think I'd like to see A&M Georgia.
I would like to see A&M in Georgia.
Something different. Elko's a defensive-minded coach. I saw enough in that first battle of Georgia-Texas that I don't know if it would change much.
No. Well, the issue now for A&M is the injuries are... Attrition starting to hit. Le'Veon Moss is out for the season, so it shouldn't affect them the next 2 games, but definitely could be.
So we're going to end up with Bama versus Georgia then? No, be too hard because both of Bama's losses are in conference, right?
Yeah, they lost to Vandy and Tennessee.
They're kind of on the outside looking. Your 3 teams right now are Georgia, A&M, and am I missing one in there? Tennessee. Those are your 3.
In terms of what?
1 loss in the conference.
Texas.
LSU has LSU. I missed Texas. And then LSU.
Yeah,
LSU only has 1
loss. 1 as well. Yep, because their other was non-con.
That's right. So LSU would be, if you guys want something interesting, they would be the one you would root for to beat Alabama this weekend to get something different in the SEC championship.
That's not really something different because we've seen it before.
If it's LSU, Texas A&M, it's not. It's totally different.
Nobody wants to root for Brian Kelly, Clinton.
Oh, the Notre Dame fans don't want him to.
You know what would really be fun if Indiana beat Ohio State, so we didn't have to watch Ohio State in another Big Ten title game. Oh, I forgot you haven't watched one of those in 4 years because you can't beat
I'm
Michigan.
I'm going there in person, so I will be watching whoever's there. I think what is interesting, what happens if Oregon loses a game? And then everybody else, Ohio State and Penn State went out. You have a three-way tie with one loss teams at the top. Penn State and Oregon did not play, so now you have to go to tiebreakers.
I think what I saw when people were hypothesizing, because the hypothesized scenario was if Indiana, Oregon, and Penn State all finished 12-0, and I think Oregon would still have been one because at that point the tiebreaker would become your record against, or like the combined record of your non-common Big Ten opponents.
Okay.
And I think the math at the time was it would likely have been Oregon that would have been first. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know where. I don't know. I don't know.
Indiana would be in a tough spot because don't they have that Western Carolina or whatever on there?
Well, that's just
Western
Big Ten. It's
Illinois.
just no. It's just Big Ten teams, not your overall conference schedule.
I thought you said non-Big Ten teams.
No, it's your non common opponent Big Ten teams because if you're not going to count Iowa for both because their record's the same on both years.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So
But
it would be
that's not
interesting.
something we would know until the end of the season because a lot
Yeah.
can happen.
I don't want that scenario to happen
No,
because
but
there
then
wouldn't
if
be
you
a way
lose,
if it's Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. Penn State couldn't trump Ohio State in a tiebreaker, right? Because Ohio State would have the head-to-head.
correct.
But then
Well, no,
Oregon,
no, because then it would go because if that's the situation where it's like the three-way tiebreaker, it goes down to the next tiebreaker, which I don't remember the next, but I don't remember the next tiebreaker after that. But it would end up coming down to something like your opponent's win losses, your Big Ten opponent's win losses.
so there's still a way Penn State gets in over Ohio State. Then is what you're saying, even though Ohio
I
State beat
if
them
I
head-to-head.
if I understand the tiebreaker correctly, yes.
That would
Well,
be
I don't know. So
absolute
like
vomit.
I don't. Well, so this was just if you don't play. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
play, if they haven't
Okay,
played. So I
but
don't
they
know if
would
like if it
play.
was like a. So I right. So I don't know if it's like a three-way tie in Oregon as a tiebreaker. No, yeah, because then
Oregon,
I
Penn
don't.
State haven't played though. So who would you put in there? Even though
Well,
Oregon
I
beat
think it would.
Ohio State has the head-to-head on Penn State. Oregon has the one on Ohio State, but Oregon and Penn State are the two that haven't played.
Well, I think it would just be
So how
Oregon
do
or
you
Ohio
tie break
State.
those? That
I
would
have
be
no
my
idea.
thought, but that's an intriguing scenario because the other two did not play.
I
Like
don't
the
know.
hardest one would be if Penn State Oregon played, then Penn State beat Oregon, then they all beat each other. Then that would be, I guess, in a way, the easiest one because you just go right down the
Just
list.
you put all three of the teams on the field at the same time, and you have a battle royale to get it. Everyone's got to fight for the ball to get it into the assigned end zone.
Field
They're
goal
playing on
kicking.
a they're playing on a triangle.
First two teams to make a 50-yard field goal get in. It's like
That's like
penalty
a,
kicks in
it's like a,
soccer.
yeah, it's like they're a shootout. We're gonna have a shootout to determine it. They're gonna meet at a
Then
back. You know, it's gonna be a coin flip.
the loser gets to go sit in the stands and watch the two teams play.
Honestly, I feel like I would rather just lose the tiebreaker in that instance because then you
I didn't
just
be the
sit back and prepare for the
get a
playoff.
bye and get
Yeah,
your team ready
that's your
because you'd
bye for
be
the
in.
first round. Yeah. So
Yep.
then you prepare for your home playoff game.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, anything else you want to touch on with this?
Not particularly. Just want to get some rankings out there before they release theirs. I feel like every Monday could kind of become, now that we're in November, an update based on what the week happens. And then with us, we get another guest that comes on to fill our time. But this is kind of when the rankings matter now, right? I mean, the pentultimate and the final ones are the ones that matter the most. But it's kind of fun to see where you might put a team. Like you and I are both pretty high on Indiana, so we'll see where they are tomorrow.
No, for sure. Like I feel like normally the first set of rankings don't matter because there's so much volatility that can kind of happen week to week. But with some of these teams, there's just not a whole lot of opportunity for resume boosting
Mm-hmm.
throughout the rest of the season. other teams do have an opportunity against teams that are currently in the playoff, or we expect to be currently in the
Yeah.
playoff based on the first ranking. So there's could be a lot of movement with this, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the committee views the non-Oregon undefeated teams in relation to some of the one-loss teams, and how the committee views those kind of tier two one-loss teams in relation to each other. Because I think the top four is going to be probably identical to the people being Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, and Miami. But what happens
Mhm.
from like 5 to 11? Like you could honestly put those teams in one of those lotto ball things and pull an order out, and I would buy it. Like if you're gonna tell me that Notre Dame is ranked number 5, I mean I probably wouldn't believe that, but I could see a universe where they did that. You tell me that Indiana's 5, I could see that. You tell me that Penn State's 5, I could see that. Like that's going to be fascinating, especially when you're looking at some of these teams like a Penn State or a Notre Dame that don't really have a lot of meat on the bone in November. Like this initial placement is going to be huge for them because, I mean, you keep winning out. In theory, you should be fine. There's not a lot of jumping. I think that's going to be able to happen, especially with some of these teams that develop a second loss. So where you are
So
initially, I think that's going to be predictive on where you might end up as long as you keep winning.
I have two questions for you then.
Okay.
Outside of Ohio State, Georgia, who do you think is the highest ranked one team tomorrow for the committee? And the second question is,
Highest one
who do
loss
you
team.
think outside of Ohio State, Georgia, who do you think is
Okay.
the next one? And then of the two lost teams, which one do you think is most likely to be in the top 10 tomorrow? Because I think there's going to be one.
I think they end up putting Texas as the next one loss team for some reason. I don't really understand what that reason would be. Again, I have them behind both Notre Dame and Tennessee because they don't have a good win this year. And it's not their fault that Michigan sucks. Like that's a tough break and sometimes
Mhm.
that just happens. But
Still a good win in a good environment, but it's a good win. It's not a great win.
it's also one of those things that we all expected Florida State to be a playoff team before, and now here we are sitting at the first week of November, and Notre Dame is playing a 1-8 Florida State team in prime time, and it's not Notre Dame's fault that Florida State shit the bed this year, but
Mm-hmm.
those are the cards you dealt, and guess what? You got to finish the season with a what could be a freaking 4-7 USC team too, which I don't think any of us had on our bingo card. So listen, man, when adversity strikes, you handle it. Whatever, something like that. That doesn't make any sense. No, I think they'll probably have Texas as the next highest ranked one loss team, and then two loss team in the top 10.
It could be
I think
10th, but it counts
I,
top 10.
I think it's gonna be Alabama
I agree. I think Alabama will be in the top 10 tomorrow.
because of the
That
Georgia
that
win.
win to Georgia is going to carry them in there.
And then even though they should have lost to South Carolina, and South Carolina is just kind of like questionable, you're gonna get the I bet you that South Carolina sneaks into the back half of the top 25. So then the committee could be like, oh, well, they have a second top 25 win against an upstart South Carolina team that just beat Texas A&M and almost beat Alabama and almost beat LSU before Lenore Sellers got hurt. That's going to be what they do.
Yep. They'll be there. You know it. And then Vandy will obviously be in there so that Texas has a ranked win.
And Missouri just missed out at number 26. This was a big win for both Texas A&M and Alabama.
Yep. Shit, they
You
might
know,
be in the top 25.
no, they won't. They're gonna. I think they're gonna have to play Drew Pine still. They're gonna lose.
Ryan,
at
didn't they
least
throw in like an
one.
8-4 Mississippi State at one point just so Bama could get credit for another win?
Oh yeah, they do that.
They
That's
do
like
whatever they want.
literally the thing is we're just spots 21 to 25 don't matter, so we're gonna put whoever we want in there to justify our decisions up the chain.
Yep. In that case, put Illinois in or Iowa in there for Ohio State and Iowa State.
Yeah, there you go.
We'll see what happens. It'll be interesting. I have parent teacher conferences tomorrow night at 7:15. So when's the thing? At 7:30 or 7?
Bro, I have no idea. Bowling Green plays tomorrow night. That's the only important thing that's happening tomorrow night. There's nothing else in this country important happening tomorrow night other than the return of midweek action.
That's right. Most important thing on the map.
Bingo. Well, cool, man. We'll touch on what the committee's actual rankings were on our Thursday preview show, where we will also preview Week 11 in the Big Ten Midwest slate.
Sadly, week 11.
I know we're already into November. It's flying by. I'm sure there's probably going to be a MAC game on, so that'll be good for us.
Yeah. Good news is for us, when we do get down to 2 episodes a week, we get extra sleep. We can go to bed earlier one night a week.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that schedule because I would like to very much optimize. Listen, keep Thursday nights because I'm about to go back on Friday nights for work, so I don't have to start work until 1 o'clock, so I can sleep in.
It's perfect, right?
Good for me. All right, y'all. Thanks for joining us once again tonight. We'll be back on Thursday for the pick show. We'll see y'all then.
See you.
Yay.
50 minutes.